The engine hummed. Amir gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white in the darkness. It was late. The highway stretched before him like a black ribbon. He was alone, just him and the whispering wind. Another long haul. He was used to it. This was his life. He pulled into a deserted rest stop. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the cracked asphalt. A chill ran down his spine. The place felt empty, too empty. An unsettling feeling crept over him. Amir stepped out of his truck. He needed to stretch his legs. He needed some coffee. He walked towards the vending machines, his footsteps echoing in the silence. A figure emerged from the darkness. Amir froze. A woman stood there, her eyes downcast. She was shrouded in a shawl, a pale blue, the colour of a winter sky. She looked lost, sad, desperately sad. He couldn't turn away. Something about her drew him in. "Need a ride?" Amir asked. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her eyes held his gaze. He saw a lifetime of sorrow in them. "Get in," Amir said, his voice barely a whisper. The woman got in. She didn't speak, she just stared out the window. The highway lights flashed across her face, but her expression remained unchanged. It was an unsettling silence. Miles turned into hours. The silence remained unbroken. Amir glanced at her. Her sadness was palpable. It filled the truck. He felt a chill, and it wasn't from the night air. "Where are you headed?" he finally asked. The woman didn't answer. She kept staring ahead, her eyes fixed on something he couldn't see. "We're coming up on Elmwood Road," Amir said. The woman turned to him. For the first time she spoke. "Stop here," she whispered, her voice cold and hollow. Amir hit the brakes. He looked over at the woman. She was gone, vanished. He felt a cold dread grip his heart. He was alone again. He got out of the truck. He looked around. There was nothing but darkness and the sound of the wind. Later, Amir learned about the accident, a hit-and-run on Elmwood Road. 20 years ago, a young woman walking alone, never identified, never found. He knew then. He knew he had encountered something unexplainable, something tragic, something lost. He had given a ride to a ghost.
The Wilson family's station wagon rumbled through the night. They were driving home from a vacation trip. Dad hummed along to the radio. Mom stared out the window. 11-year-old Josh and his little sister Emily tried to stay awake, but the rhythmic bump of the tires on the highway was making their eyelids heavy. "Are we almost there yet?" Emily whined from the back seat. She kicked her feet against the seat in front of her. Josh knew that meant she was getting cranky. "Not even close," Dad said cheerfully. "But look, up ahead. I see a sign for a rest stop. Who wants to stop for snacks and a bathroom break?" Everyone did. Even Josh had to admit he was getting hungry. And he really needed to use the bathroom. He hoped they had slushies. He loved road trip slushies. The rest stop was nearly deserted. A few tired-looking cars and trucks were scattered around the parking lot. The whole place felt lonely and dark. Josh shivered a little as he got out of the car. He stuck close to his parents as they walked towards the brightly lit building. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and cleaning products. Dad headed straight for the coffee machine. Mom took Emily to the bathroom. Josh browsed the snack aisle, trying to decide between potato chips and gummy worms. "Don't wander off, Josh," Mom said as she came out of the restrooms with Emily in tow. Emily's eyes were already fixed on the candy section. "I won't," Josh mumbled, grabbing a bag of chips. He watched his mom and sister go into the women's restroom. Then he turned back to the snacks. He wondered if he could convince his dad to get him a slushie too. Back in the car, Josh crunched his chips. He watched the parking lot through the window. The darkness outside seemed to press in on the car. He could see his reflection in the side mirror, and he could see something else too. A dark shape, just beyond the edge of the light. "Mom," he said, his voice small. "There's someone out there." Mom turned in her seat. She followed his gaze to the side mirror. "Don't be silly, Josh," she said. "It's just a shadow." But even as she spoke, the shadow seemed to shift. It moved closer to the car. Josh held his breath. He stared at the shadow. It was getting bigger, closer. He looked at his mom. Her eyes were wide with fear. She quickly rolled up the car window even though it was already closed. Then she locked the car doors. Click, click. Maybe it's just someone walking by, she said, her voice shaky. But Josh could tell she didn't believe it. Neither did he. The shadow wasn't walking. It was gliding toward them. Suddenly, the car door opened, flooding the car with light. Josh and his mom both jumped, letting out little screams. "Hey, what's all the racket?" Dad asked, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked from Josh's terrified face to his mom's pale one. "What's going on?" "There's someone out there," Josh whispered, pointing at the side mirror. Dad frowned and glanced out the window. "Out where? I don't see anything." Mom took a deep breath. "Maybe it was just my imagination," she said, forcing a smile. But she wouldn't meet Josh's eyes. Dad got into the car. He handed Mom her coffee and took a sip of his own. "You guys are being paranoid," he said with a chuckle. "There's nothing out there. Just shadows and our imaginations." Josh wanted to believe him. He really did. But he couldn't shake the image of that dark shape moving towards the car. He knew what he had seen, and he had a feeling he wouldn't forget it anytime soon. They continued their drive home. Josh tried to fall asleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow in the mirror. He kept glancing back, expecting to see the dark figure lurking in the darkness behind them. But there was nothing there. Mom and Dad chatted quietly, trying to act like nothing had happened. But Josh could tell they were both still shaken. The radio played softly in the background, but the music did little to ease the tension in the car. Suddenly, the music was interrupted by a loud buzzing sound. A voice boomed through the speakers. "This is an emergency broadcast. Attention motorists. Authorities are warning travelers about a series of strange occurrences at a rest stop on Highway 17. Josh's heart jumped in his chest. He exchanged a nervous look with his mom. Dad turned up the radio volume. "Witnesses have reported seeing shadowy figures and experiencing unusual events," the voice continued. "Travelers are advised to avoid the rest stop until further notice." The blood drained from Josh's face. It wasn't his imagination. The shadow was real, and it wasn't alone. The emergency broadcast ended. The regular radio program resumed, but no one in the car felt like listening anymore. They drove the rest of the way home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Josh knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the shadow in the mirror, and he wouldn't ask for another rest stop break for a very, very long time. He shuddered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. Some mysteries are best left unsolved.
Arash knew the city like the back of his hand. During the day, it teemed with life. But at night, it was a different beast. As a food delivery driver, Arash was a hunter in the concrete jungle. He brought comfort food to night owls, students, and anyone else craving a late-night snack. His usual route took him through the heart of the city, a maze of neon lights and bustling streets. But sometimes a delivery request would send him to the outskirts. That's how he found himself on the old highway, a ribbon of asphalt that snaked its way into the darkness beyond the city limits. The highway was deserted at this hour. Streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that danced with the movement of his car. It was on this lonely stretch of road that Arash encountered the pit stop. It wasn't much to look at, a small, rundown building with a flickering neon sign that read, "Pete's Pit Stop." The parking lot was usually empty, except for the occasional truck driver taking a break from the road. The first time Arash stopped at Pete's Pit Stop, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The air was heavy, as if weighed down by unseen things. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about the place felt off. Later, when he returned to the bustling heart of the city, he overheard other drivers talking about the pit stop. Whispers of strange occurrences, flickering lights, and a presence that sent chills down your spine. They said it was haunted. The stories piqued Arash's curiosity, but he never let them deter him from his job. He had deliveries to make, and a little spooky story wasn't going to stop him. "Yeah, I'm on my way," he'd tell his dispatcher, his voice calm and steady, even as a shiver ran down his spine. "Just passing Pete's now. Be there in 10. One particularly dark and stormy night, Arash found himself driving down the old highway once more. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the world beyond his windshield. Thunder rumbled in the distance, each boom echoing like a giant's heartbeat. His car sputtered. The engine coughed, the headlights flickered and then died, plunging him into darkness. He coasted to a stop, his heart pounding in his chest. "Not now," he muttered, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. He tried the ignition again, but the engine wouldn't catch. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling like a banshee. With a sigh, Arash grabbed his phone to call for help, but as he did, his eyes were drawn to the faint glow of a neon sign in the distance. Pete's Pit Stop. It was his only hope. Arash pushed open the door to the pit stop, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something else he couldn't quite place. The only light came from a single flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. He was alone, or so he thought. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he noticed a figure sitting in the corner, shrouded in shadow. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his clothing old-fashioned, out of place. Arash's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge his presence. He simply sat there, a silent, unsettling figure in the gloom. Arash backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving the figure in the corner. He fumbled for the doorknob, his hand shaking. The door wouldn't budge. It was locked. Panic welled up inside him, tightening its icy grip around his chest. He rattled the doorknob again, harder this time, but it was no use. He was trapped. He spun around, his eyes searching the shadows, his heart pounding in his ears. The figure was gone. Arash was alone, but the feeling of dread that had settled over him refused to dissipate. He could feel eyes on him, watching his every move. He backed away from the door, his gaze darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of movement. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed ominously. Each creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the windows, sent a jolt of fear through him. He was trapped in this desolate place with what? The ghost stories he'd dismissed as mere superstition now echoed in his mind, taking on a terrifying reality. Just when the fear threatened to consume him, he saw it. A glimmer of light in the distance. Headlights. A vehicle was approaching. Hope surged through him, a lifeline in the sea of fear. He raced to the window, his hands slapping against the glass. He had to get their attention. The vehicle slowed as it approached, its headlights momentarily illuminating the interior of the pit stop, revealing Arash's frantic figure in the window. The vehicle came to a stop outside. Arash didn't hesitate. He threw open the door and ran, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. He didn't dare look back. He could feel the presence of the pit stop clinging to him, a ghostly chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. He burst out into the rain, the cool air washing over him, and stumbled towards the waiting vehicle. It was a pickup truck, its engine idling. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, leaned out the window, his brow furrowed in concern. "You all right, son?" the man asked, his voice gruff but kind. "Didn't figure anyone would be out here in this weather." Arash stumbled over his words, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "My car. Broke down. Phone. Dead." He pointed back towards his car, parked a short distance away. The man nodded, his expression understanding. "Hop in," he said. "Let's get you out of this storm." As they drove away from the pit stop, Arash glanced back at the building, its neon sign flickering erratically in the rain. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The man followed his gaze. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he said, a knowing smile playing on his lips. Arash hesitated, then poured out his story. The locked door, the figure in the shadows, the overwhelming sense of dread. The man listened patiently, nodding along as Arash spoke. When he was finished, the man took a deep breath and let out a slow sigh. "Folks round here say that place is haunted," he said, his voice low. They say a young fella was killed there years ago, hit and run, never caught the driver. Arash listened intently, his earlier fear giving way to a chilling fascination. Some say his spirit never left, the man continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. They say he wanders the pit stop, looking for the person who took his life. Arash shivered, the man's words sending a fresh wave of goosebumps down his spine. He couldn't be sure if he believed in ghosts, but there was something about the pit stop, something about the man he'd seen, that defied rational explanation. The man dropped Arash off at a nearby diner where he could call for help. As he watched the truck disappear into the distance, Arash couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the stranger's kindness. He stepped inside the diner, the warmth of the brightly lit space a welcome contrast to the cold, eerie darkness of the pit stop. He made his call, his voice still shaky as he recounted his experience. As he waited for the tow truck, Arash sipped his coffee, his mind replaying the events of the night. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been given a glimpse into a world beyond his understanding, a world where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. He never went back to Pete's pit stop. Even during daylight hours, the memory of that night of the figure in the shadows was enough to keep him away. Arash continued to drive the lonely roads at night, bringing comfort food to the city that never slept. But he never forgot his encounter at the cursed pit stop. It remained with him a haunting reminder that some roads are best left untraveled, especially when the shadows grow long and the whispers on the wind carry tales of restless spirits. The city, with its comforting lights and familiar streets, beckoned, but the darkness, with its secrets and its mysteries, held a strange allure. And Arash knew, deep down, that he would never be entirely free from the chilling memory of the cursed pit stop.